and the MTA. Thank you.
Chris, thank you. And I will say I went by the World Trade Center site this morning, and you had all the cranes. Some of them had been taken down. All was secured. Back to work tomorrow, I hope. And the memorial continues to be on schedule for opening on 9/11. All things come back to the MTA when it's how we come out of this, and I'll have Jay talk about it in a little bit. But first, I just wanted to report I drove around the coastal areas in Manhattan and Brooklyn to survey the storm damage this morning. I visited a shelter at FDR High School in Brooklyn, where I really was struck by the satisfaction on the volunteers' faces because they knew that they were making a difference, and the clients who they served couldn't have been more appreciative. Here we are today at the NYPD's new Joint Operations Center in Lower Manhattan. It is a new state-of-the-art operations center that we built with city and federal funds, and I did want to say thank you for the support we received from Senator Chuck Schumer, former Senator Hillary Clinton, Senator Gillibrand, Congressman Peter King, and the rest of the delegation. It really does make a difference. The Joint Operations Center was activated to coordinate NYPD operations in preparation for and during Hurricane Irene. And this morning, as you know, Hurricane Irene hit New York City. The good news is the worst is over, and we will soon move to restore and return mode. The tides, we're heading towards low tide, and as you all know, the backside of a low-pressure area comes up the East Coast. The winds will force the waters away from the coast, so the dangers of flooding, additional flooding, have been eliminated, and the existing flooding should start to go down. We don't yet know the full extent of the damage caused by the Category 1 storm, but so far, as I said earlier, there is no confirmation of deaths or injuries from the storm, and we're really very grateful for that. We are seeing some very serious consequences of the flooding, or of the storm, including flooding and downed trees and power outages. And as we anticipated, the storm surge has caused serious flooding across the 5 boroughs, including here in Lower Manhattan, where the East and Harlem and Hudson rivers are flowing over their banks and into the parks and low-lying streets at the water's edge. We did have substantial erosion at the Staten Island beaches and in the Rockaways, where the waves breached the 94th Street between 122nd and 132nd Streets. And on the west side of Manhattan, water was flowing over the docks when I was by earlier at the boat basin in River Park. I'm told in the Bronx, Ocean Beach is underwater, as is Mill Pond Park and the riverfront lots at Yankee Stadium. The Bronx River is moving very fast, and people should certainly stay away from flooded areas and rivers in particular. If you were to fall into the Bronx River, it's really hard to see how emergency personnel could get to you in time. In Brooklyn, the eastbound Belt Parkway still is flooded as of last report due to the collapse of a retaining wall. Now, yesterday we warned residents that their power may go out or be cut preemptively to avoid damage to the power grid caused by flooding. Thankfully, Con Ed did not have to do that, and where they had to cut steam service to some buildings, they think that will be restored by Tuesday. Last reports, there was something like 62,000 households whose power had been knocked out by the storm, including 28,000 households in Queens and over 19,000 households in Staten Island. Con Ed is on the job. They have all their crews out there. Kevin, thank you for all of Con Ed's service. And Kevin's estimate was probably by Tuesday, day after tomorrow, to get everybody back, although overhead lines are easy to see when they're down. It's easy for the crews to get to them and work. And big chunks of that 62,000 should be back much earlier. The city's hospitals all have contingency plans in place for possible power loss, including redundancy for emergency generators at Bellevue and Kohler Goldwater that are the most vulnerable to flooding. Thankfully, they didn't have to use those, but if the next storm were to come through, they're ready. In terms of tree damage, the storm has uprooted something like 650 trees throughout the 5 boroughs. I've always been fascinated about how we get the number exactly of trees, but it's a number like that. The Parks Department, however, does have, and this we can count, more than 100 forestry crews working today to remove downed trees and limbs. And the good news is nobody so far has been hurt. But I did drive down Ocean Parkway this morning, and there were no trees down in one segment. When we came back an hour later, there was an enormous tree that had come down on the other side. People standing around had come down over some cars. No injuries. But let me just remind you, when the ground is very wet, the older trees absorb a lot of moisture. They get heavier, and without wind, without a lot of notice, they can all of a sudden fall. So nature is dangerous. Pay attention. All in all, we are in pretty good shape because of the exhaustive steps I think we took that to prepare for whatever came our way. The very best city employees and first responders are going to work nonstop to make sure that through the storm and its aftermath we are safe. And in fact, this morning the FDNY used 3 rescue boats to save 61 adults and 3 babies in the Bull's Head area of Staten Island after the lake in Willowbrook Park overflowed. Sal, where are you? Thank you for all your men to get out there. These people were trapped in 5 feet of water and faced a very scary situation, and 50 FDNY firefighters answered the call, as they always do, within 2 minutes, and they rescued every single one of the people trapped there with no injuries reported. Now, of course, what's on everybody's mind is, when can you return to your homes in the evacuated low-lying areas? I understand that people are very anxious to get back home, but safety is still our first priority. So we're taking some basic safety measures so that that can happen as soon as possible. The FDNY is currently up in the air with a senior engineer from the buildings department, just looking at an aerial survey to see if there are buildings where the water had gotten on all 4 sides and there might be a danger of foundations being undermined. They're looking for down wires and hazards like that and other surge damage. But we think that people can start to go back. Certainly by 3 o'clock we will officially lift the evacuation order. The shelters operated safely last night. All told, 81 emergency shelters we set up to provide a safe place for more than 9,000 evacuees to wait out the storm. We are now working to get buses from the Department of Education and the MTA to give those people the ability to get back. Let me just caution everyone, if you live in a high-rise building, particularly a NYCHA building, there may have been water damage in the basement. The elevators may not be working, and there are long climbs if you live on a higher floor. So with that caveat, NYCHA buildings will be open, and we will try to get people that needed buses to get out, give them the bus rides back. But we do want to remind everybody that there's no guarantee those elevators are all working. A case-by-case basis, we're surveying. We don't know how long, how big the damage is, or serious the damage is, and how long it'd take to get the elevators back. Special care needs evacuees, the city and state health departments are working together to take the necessary steps to verify that their facilities are structurally safe and appropriately staffed and resourced. And once this process is complete, the city will be arranging transportation from the shelters to their homes. In the meantime, these evacuees will be maintained in shelters until they can be safely transported. And a full assessment of special needs, medical need evacuees is currently being conducted to determine whether any of them might be more appropriately transferred to a hospital this evening rather than stay in a shelter for a second night. But the bottom line is that, keep in mind, it took us 2 days to move roughly 9,000 people out of senior homes and nursing homes and hospitals. We did it safely, and we're going to do it safely moving it back, but that just gives you a feel for the amount of time it's going to take to get everybody back to where they were last week. The NYCHA engineers are looking at everything. They do have to reactivate boilers and assess the building conditions and other things like that. But the progress that they're making gives us some comfort that most people will be able to get back in. Something about 6 o'clock we would suggest to go back for NYCHA housing. 3 o'clock we are officially lifting the evacuation order, but please give people, the engineers and custodians in the NYCHA buildings, a little more time so that they can get back, and if they can get all the elevators back working, that would be good. We don't want somebody to try to climb up a lot of stairs that just may have a medical problem. The police commissioner and his staff, and Bob Lamandry and his staff, have checked out everything. We're still looking on the ground, police cars, to look for down wires and look for tree limbs and block off those areas. You should just be careful when you go out there. We're not back to normal. We just think we can get back to our homes. In terms of transportation, I'm happy to say that all of the bridges are open to the Rockaways. Some of those had been closed. The main TBTA and Port Authority and city bridges did remain open because the winds never got to the point where they had to be closed. The tunnels all kept working. The Hudson Tunnel had one lane closed in the middle of the night, but it still was open. The ferry service, Staten Island Ferry out of St. George, begins at 3 o'clock today. Just remember, the Staten Island Railroad is not functioning, so you can't take that to the subway, nor is mass transit on the Manhattan side. And so just like Chris Ward talked about point-to-point with the PATH tubes, the Staten Island Ferry is a point-to-point, and when you get to Manhattan or you get to St. George, then you've got to figure out how to get where you really want to go. Now, I know that many properties throughout the city have sustained damage, including some city government buildings in Lower Manhattan that had some windows blown out or flooding. Whenever there is a major emergency, our Office of Emergency Management activates the 311 damage assessment tool, and their callers are surveyed about the extent of the damage to their property. 311 then compiles the data and uses it to deploy state OEM and FEMA workers and inspectors. FEMA then does a preliminary damage assessment job to see if we are eligible for federal reimbursement. FEMA has been here throughout this entire process, and I wanted to say thank you to them. We have enabled a damage report tool on the city's website, nyc.gov, so you can report property damage online. And once again, for updates throughout the storm and its aftermath, and now you can use it for this as well, you can always go to at NYC Mayor's Office or at Notify NYC on Twitter. I did want to thank all the volunteers helping fellow New Yorkers, particularly 2,500 city employees who help staff our evacuation centers. And I'm especially grateful to our fire, police, first responders, correction officers at Rikers Island, and other city employees who really gave it their all. And a big thanks to the taxi drivers, livery drivers, bus companies, and others who answered our call and helped transport some of the most vulnerable neighbors to safety. Now, as we've seen so many times before, this emergency is really about bringing out the best in New Yorkers. I'm happy to say overnight crime activity was below normal. Ray reports 45 arrests overnight compared to, on average, on a typical Saturday night in August, 345. So 300 fewer arrests. If that doesn't tell you about New Yorkers, I don't know what does. People said, oh, you were going to have a problem. Quite the contrary. New Yorkers do come together. The plan for tomorrow, we understand that some people will have difficult times coming to work. City government offices will be open with some disruptions, I'm sure, because people can't get there. And the New York Stock Exchange and the other financial markets plan to open on time and have a normal day. I'm sure most businesses will, with some minor quick adjustments, get right back to keeping the economy going in the city and giving people the opportunity to share in what's great about New York. And the tourists will be out there again, and all of us can look back and talk about where were you on the day of Irene. Let me, in Spanish, just say, mucho están preguntando a los evacuados pueden regresar a sus casas. Estamos tomando precauciones para que todos puedan regresar pronto y de manera segura. And with that, Ray, anything else on crime you want to add?
No, the only thing I would say is that the 9/11 volume calls to the system were down during the storm compared to what they were a year ago. Now they're up about 70%. So I would simply urge people to use 9/11 for the real thing, a real emergency. Everything else should go to 311, particularly down trees. The system, can become overloaded, so we ask your cooperation in that regard.
Good. Sal, anything of the fire department? Fires?
Fires were down last night, but I would urge people that don't have power tonight throughout the night to please use battery-operated flashlights and avoid the use of candles. We urge people not to use candles.
Good. Sanitation Department, it'll take a few days for John Doherty and his staff to catch up because they've got to pick up trees that are cut up and left there. If you see sanitation waste baskets, which they did empty, did turn upside down and put next to buildings deliberately so that they wouldn't get blown away and people wouldn't fill them with stuff that's going to blow around. Now, if you want to be a good Samaritan, you can take them, turn them right side up, and put them back on that corner. If you don't, the Sanitation Department, when they get around, will do exactly that. And now the MTA. Jay?
Thank you, Mayor. As you would expect, given the vast transportation network that we have here, we are looking at vastly different situations across different parts of our transportation network. We've begun the process of assessing the storm's damage. We can only do that as quickly as we can do it safely, and so we're in that process right now. The NYPD and state police have offered helicopter support, which will be hugely valuable to allowing us to get out across the network and assess the damage that is above ground. I think what I can say to you is that the actions that we took yesterday were right. The yards where we relocated trains out of are yards that are underwater right now. So it's very clear that the actions to protect the system have helped us. Nonetheless, it's also clear that we have widespread impacts of the storm. We have flooding, we have downed trees, we have power outages all across the region. What I'd like to do is to run down the preliminary assessments of what's happening with our services. Determinations about the timing for restoration of services will be made after these assessments are completed. As I said, we're still underway with assessments and in consultation with the governor and the mayor. On the subway system, the good news is that the worst fear we had, which was that the under-river tunnels on the East River would flood with salt water, were not realized. We certainly dodged something there. However, there are very clearly impacts on the system. What we have is a stepwise process. It involves us literally walking tracks with our staff, repairing things that we see with crews, and then running non-revenue trains over tracks to be able to see that everything is safe. We cannot restore passenger service until we have done it in that order. Otherwise, we will be putting people in jeopardy. So here's what we're doing right now. We have pump trains operating in several places on the subway system where we took on water. We have people walking the tracks, as I mentioned before. We're getting people up onto the elevated rights-of-way. We have over 200 miles of elevated track on the subway. We're getting people up onto the elevated rights-of-way as wind gusts allow. Our safety precautions, obviously, for our employees. We don't want to put them into unsafe situations. And, of course, we need to get equipment and people back in place. One of the big issues we also have is that moving the equipment out of harm's way means that it's in the wrong place for service. For example, we have virtually no trains located in Brooklyn right now because we had to empty out all of the yards that were in Brooklyn. On the Long Island Railroad, we have trees down and flooding in several areas. Wind gusts were continuing at various points, and we're expected to continue through the late afternoon. So the process we have of pinning up the gates, there are 295 gates on the Long Island Railroad. We cannot take those gates down and release them until the wind gusts ease up. So we will be undertaking that process as soon as the forecast calls for that. The Metro North territory may well have sustained the worst damage. We have serious flooding on all three lines of Metro North. We have power outages across the lines. Given some of the conditions up there, this may continue for some time. We have erosion of tracks and the like. Again, we'll have a better sense of all that as we're able to get up and look at everything, but it's quite clear based on our initial indications that the Metro North Railroad has sustained real damage. All of our bridges and tunnels are up and running right now, which is great news. We never lost them We haven't off the major bridges during the storm, only the bridges to the Rockaways, as the mayor said. And finally, I expect that the first service that we will be able to restore is our bus system. Again, the decisions to get buses out of harm's way means that the equipment is fine. Our process right now is really one of coordinating with the city regarding the condition of the streets, and second, being able to get operators back to be able to drive the buses. We have prioritized the work, as the mayor said, with NYCHA and with the shelters to be able to get some people back home from the shelters, and we're immediately providing about 20 buses to OEM to assist in that process. For the current moment, we are continuing the fare and toll policy that we established for Hurricane Irene. There are no tolls on the Rockaway bridges, no tolls on the Throgs Neck, Verrazano, and Whitestone bridges. We'll continue that now to allow people to get back in the aftermath of this the storm. After we do the assessments, as I said, I would be better able to give people an indication of when we'll be able to bring back the services. As I've tried to indicate here now, this is a difficult process. There is damage. We have to do it in a stepwise way. It will take some time, but we'll do it in a way that is safe both for our customers and for our employees. Thank you.
Jay, thank you. I just wanted to thank First Deputy Mayor Patty Harris and Adrian Benepe for making sure our parks are safe and all of the other things they've done. Adrian suggests that you stay out from underneath trees for the rest of the day, certainly while there's wind, but even you should be careful for a few days. The trees are more likely to come down when the ground is very soft. I wanted to thank Linda Gibbs and Seth Diamond and Tom Farley for all of their work with the people who needed shelter and needed special services. I don't think I've ever seen anything go as smoothly as they've moved people out and in the process of moving them back. And I wanted to thank Deputy Mayor Bob Steele and John Rea. NYCHA is an enormous part of our city in terms of housing, and together they really did inform the people there and to make sure that they could, when they wanted to leave, get to places, and the reverse is happening right now. And lastly, Bob Lamandry for all of his work, and Ray and Sal, and Kaz Holloway, who really coordinated all. Kaz, you did a great job, and I just wanted to say thank you. And DOT, well, if you run into a puddle, you blame Jeanette Sedekan. But I think, in all fairness, she and the sanitation department and keeping our streets clean and open, whether it's the bridges or the Staten Island Ferry or whatever, they did a great job. The American Red Cross, thank you for coming. Volunteerism, Ms. Burford, thank you very much for everything all the people have done. We would be happy, I don't know if I missed anybody. Who? Oh, Joe Bruno, hiding right behind me. Office of Emergency Management did what they're supposed to do, and I think the results show that. They provide a place for everybody to come together and some coordination and direction. I spent a good time this morning going around shaking everybody's hand in their facilities and thanking them. So, Joe, thank you. We'll be happy to take a question or two. Who? Oh, I said before she didn't lose any prisoners. That's good. Or any jails, she said. That's correct. We'd be happy to take some questions on topic if anybody has any. Yes, sir.
So what's the message to commuters for tomorrow?
It's going to be tough. I mean, we don't know. Jay doesn't know yet. And the most important thing is that he has protected the equipment and the system so that it can come back up, and there's no damage that would be very long term. But depending on the winds and what he finds when they walk the elevated and how they can get the equipment to where it needs to be, and how their employees, it's awful tough. How does the guy that drives the train get to the train? He's got exactly that problem. So I think it's fair to say you're going to have a tough commute in the morning, and if you're pleasantly surprised, that's great. Path tubes, I think Chris said, start at 9 a.m. Staten Island Ferry will be running. But, there's taxis and some people can walk and that sort of thing. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, in the briefing just a minute ago, you said that you'd made exactly the right call. I think that means about evacuations and the subway.
Sure.
For those who woke up this morning and felt skeptical because the storm changed, and you might not, but they might, can you just expound on why you think it was the right decision given how it played out?
Well, because our job is to basically look at two questions. What is the weather forecast at the point that decisions have to be made? For example, moving people from hospitals and nursing homes and senior homes take a lot of time and have to be done very carefully. And so we started that on Friday. If you remember, we asked everybody to move on Friday. And in fact, a few didn't get done until Saturday, but we had built in some spare time with that. The other thing we have to ask is what impact can the weather have on New York? And the guiding principle is really our responsibility to make sure that everybody's safe in the city. As I said all along, if the hurricane had stopped in its tracks and went straight east, that would have been an even better result. As it is, the experts were forecasting one thing, a deadly storm heading right towards us, and we took into account the particular layout of the city, where the low-lying areas are, dangers of flooding, islands and peninsulas that if you couldn't get off and we couldn't get on, we weren't able to provide emergency care if it was needed. In some cases, people couldn't move, and then we had to make sure that we could provide life-saving services there and that their buildings were structurally safe. We factored in the impending shutdown of our public transit system and the time that it would take to evacuate some 370,000 people from the low-lying areas. People need time to leave, to make decisions, to plan with their family. You can't just say go and have everybody go. Ultimately, I think it's fair to say we were just unwilling to risk the life of a single New Yorker. And I don't know whether because of our decisions nobody died, or at least there's no reports of people dying because of the storm, or maybe it was just luck. But the bottom line is we'd make the same decisions again without hesitation. I think the most important thing going forward is that from the decisions we made, we've got to take a look and see, make sure that the next time there's a need for getting out of the way of a storm. And if you take a look around this country, I don't know if it's global warming or not, but the weather patterns have been acting very strange, and they've had a lot of repeat serious weather in some parts of this country. And if it happens again, I want to make sure that we learned some things from this one. How you activate people, what percentage of the people are going to need shelter when they leave their homes, things like that that will be useful the next time. We can't just, when a hurricane's coming, get out of the way and hope for the best. That's not responsible, and so we've done it. Nobody likes to shut down the economy of the city. Nobody likes to inconvenience people, but human lives are much more important. And in this case, I think fundamentally it was lucky for us that the hurricane came on a weekend. It made it a lot easier. Yes, Miss?
Mr. Mayor, it seems like the cost of this, both the damage to the MTA, especially Metro North, into the city, might be extensive, and I wonder, because the President declared this as an emergency zone, whether you could qualify for any...
Well, that's why we have this service call 311. FEMA gets the information to see whether we can qualify. I don't know Jay's problems. From the city itself, we didn't suffer an enormous amount of damage. Yes, there's some trees we had to clean up that we would not otherwise. Yes, there's some interruptions here and there. But in the context of operating 365 days, 24 hours a day, with a $65 billion budget, the good news is, for example, with schools. The kids didn't miss any school because public schools hadn't started, although some charter schools had. There were some inconveniences of colleges and universities here. Kids checking in, they moved their dates a little bit forward. The Mets had to cancel a couple of games. The Jets-Giants game was rescheduled. But we'll recover from most of those things, and how big the damage to the MTA is, we'll have to see, and whether or not you can get federal monies. Yes, sir.
To get federal monies, Mr. Walden?
We will, to the extent that we're able to, we will apply for federal money. I don't know yet.
Yeah.
My first focus on getting the system
Right.
back.
I was wondering what kind of a night it was for you personally last night after you left OEM and the worst of the storm had yet to come to New York, and you had all of this reaction riding on your shoulders. And
Well, I
people
looked at...
maybe looking fairly or unfairly?
Before I went to sleep a little after midnight, I looked out the window. I got up at 3 in the morning to look out the window, and then I got up at 6 and I looked out the window. And I guess I had some relief because it was when I checked the weather maps on my smartphone and when I looked out the window, it looked to me like we were being spared the worst. It could have been a lot worse than this. It could have been as bad as it was when it struck the Virginia and North Carolina coast, where you did have fatalities. But the bottom line is, between Kaz's telephone calls that never stopped, thank you, Kaz, I was well briefed. And the bottom line is, remember, you put things in place. You have a plan. We've worked on this plan for many years. And then it's my job to stand out of the way and let them do it and provide as much support as I can. And if they have cooperation problems or funding problems or something, to get involved. But we have professionals here, and you want to make sure they can do what they have to do. And that's why the city works so well. Yes, Miss.
Question for Jay Walder. When you bring the subway system back, will you do it all at once, or might you stagger trains, like some equipment is spared or recovered sooner than others?
I'm sure it will be staggered or prioritized depending on the conditions of the railway, the location of trains and where the locations are, and simply our ability to be able to bring it back. I just don't have any details on how that will happen yet, or the timing in which that will happen.
Yes, ma'am.
Two things, if I can. Are the parks open? I think some people in Manhattan are confused about Central Park.
Parks are open. We just would suggest, if you're in the middle of the Great Lawn, it's a little drizzly still and windy still, but if you walk under trees, you should be very careful because, a lot of these trees are old. When they get wet, the limbs get much heavier, particularly when there's leaves on that can collect more water. All of that weight just increases the likelihood of a tree falling.
Do you have any sense that the areas that were badly flooded extended beyond the Zone A evacuation zone?
We haven't looked at every one, but I think, the bottom line is Zone A we've worked on it for a long time to map all of the low-lying areas. It would be very unusual if the flood surge got higher than that, and it did not. So, there's some small damage from flooding. The big problems with flooding you're going to see on the Bronx River and the Hutchinson River, rivers like that are coming down, and that's why you see Jay's problems up in Westchester. Yes, sir?
The overtime cost of which it must be substantial, are you going to be able to recoup that from the federal government at all?
My guess is probably not. And keep in mind, it is substantial. But the city runs with overtime all the time. We're always responding to something. So I think when push comes to shove, when you look at the city's budget going back over time, you will not even be able to see a blip in our expenses. It'll sort of be lost in the noise. Last question, Miss.
What would you say to people who are saying that the response was overblown?
They should just look in a mirror. They are alive today, whether because of it, in spite of it. We're just not going to take any risk with people's lives. And the best scenario possible is you take the precautions, and it turns out they're not needed. The exact opposite is not something that you want to have happen, and I think that's the message that you have to do it. So, you see some people on television saying, I'm not going to pay any attention. You can run risks, and it's fine unless you get caught. We'll give the last question there, sir.
Okay, I would like to mention to Jay, Mike Aquila employees from the Mike Aquila bus depot, the one on the west side. They're very, very good. They're over there.
Good,
I would
that's
like
great to hear.
Compliment them.
Good, that's great to hear. It's a nice way to end.
I very much appreciate you saying it. I have to say that I think the thousands of men and women across the MTA shot the lights out, both in terms of evacuating people and being able to shut down the system, positioning things, and we did, by 10 o'clock last night, get every last person back to safety.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Tough commute tomorrow, but, we have tough commutes all the time.